Episode 1. Flight 19. The Lost Squadron opening. The last time they didn't know was the last Florida, December 5th, 1945. The afternoon began like any other. The sun drifted slowly past golden clouds, laying a soft sheet of light over the Fort Lauderdale Air Base. A salty, gentle breeze rustled the palm trees, carrying with it the steady sound of waves crashing in the distance. World War II had ended just a few months earlier, yet the air still lingered with the scent of engine oil, sweat, and farewells that never felt complete. On the runway, 5 dark blue TBM Avenger training planes stood in line, like metal birds, waiting to take flight once more. Their propellers clicked and sputtered, then roared to life like wild beasts. Inside, young men most barely in their 20s checked straps, watches, and compasses. One of them glanced back toward the operations building, his eyes clinging to something unseen. Perhaps the face of a lover, a letter unwritten, or just the faint music from the old radio in the military kitchen. At the center of the formation stood Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, the commanding officer of Flight 19, a seasoned pilot who had flown bombing missions in the Pacific and survived more than one close call. But today, there was something different in his eyes. Not fear, something deeper, a quiet, unwavering instinct, as if he somehow knew this flight would not be like the others. "There's something wrong," he muttered, almost too softly to hear, "but I can't quite put my finger on it." That December, America was in transition. The war had ended, and millions of servicemen were returning home from Europe and the Pacific. Airports, harbors, and train stations overflowed with laughter, tears, and reunions. But for pilots like Taylor, duty still called. The war might have ended, but flying never took a day off. Flight 19 was a routine training mission, a 3-hour flight over the Atlantic simulating naval combat. The 5-plane formation would fly in tactical triangle, practice mock bomb runs near the hens and chickens shoals, then return to base in a zigzag pattern to test navigation skills. A standard drill, performed hundreds of times before. There was no reason for concern, except for a dream. The night before the flight, Charles Taylor told his roommate he had dreamed of a plane crash. He didn't know who it involved, or where it took place, just that he heard the desperate voice of a pilot, lost in the fog, calling out to base in vain, and then only silence. "Probably just sleep deprivation," he said with a forced chuckle. "Just war jitters, maybe." But that roommate, in later interviews, said he could never forget the look in Taylor's eyes. It wasn't just a dream, it was a warning. There were 14 men in Flight 19 that day. Ensign Joseph Bosey, 19, from Pennsylvania, the youngest of the group. His mother had just sent him a Christmas cake from home. Lieutenant George Devlin, 24, laughed loudly at lunch, showing off a photo of his newlywed wife. Sergeant Edward Powers, nicknamed the Flying Textbook for his incredible memory, and the map always tucked into his front pocket. They were friends, crewmates, and young men trying to start over after escaping the horrors of war. Some were planning leave, others preparing for college, and a few had already bought engagement rings. But none of them knew that day would be the last time they touched the earth. At around 1:15 p.m., the planes took off one by one. The sound of their engines rippled through the air. A ground crew member stood by the runway, counting each aircraft as it vanished beyond the horizon. In the control tower, Lieutenant Robert Cox, the officer on radio duty, noted nothing unusual. But about 90 minutes later, the first transmission came in, and it was far from routine. "We're not sure of our position. We seem to have gone off course. I don't see land anywhere. Compass is spinning wildly. I don't know where we are anymore." Cox looked at the weatherboard. The skies were clear that day. No storms, light winds. The Avengers still had plenty of fuel. There was no reason to be lost, but that was only the beginning. By 4:00 p.m., all transmissions from Flight 19 became fragmented, then vanished entirely. The control tower kept calling, no one answered. No emergency alerts, no SOS signals, just silence. A search and rescue mission was launched at 7:00 p.m. A Martin Mariner seaplane, with 13 crew members and night search equipment, took off into the dark. IT-2 never returned. 2 disappearances. No clues. No debris. No bodies. Florida. PM. A lone soldier walked slowly around the deserted runway. Above him, only stars. He lit a cigarette, took a quiet drag, and looked up at the sky. Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing, things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you, with the help of some experts, to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. It was approximately 1:15 p.m. on December 5, 1945, when 5 TBM Avenger training aircraft of Flight 19 lifted off from Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station. The propellers sliced through the air, the roar of the engines echoing beneath the clear blue sky. Lieutenant Charles Taylor sat in the cockpit of Avenger No. 1, his eyes fixed on the southern horizon, where the endless blue ocean stretched into infinity. This wasn't his first time flying these planes, nor his first long mission after the war, but an odd feeling had begun to stir within him. The 5-plane formation held a perfect equilateral triangle, maintaining regulation distance. Every maneuver was executed with precision from the takeoff run to stabilizing altitude. The air inside the cockpits was filled with youthful energy and the quiet confidence of pilots who, just months earlier, had survived the brutal chaos of war. Lieutenant Taylor spoke firmly over the radio. Flight 19, continue on course as planned. Weather is clear, light wind. Keep an eye on your bearings. A chorus of crisp "Roger" responses echoed back. The flight advanced into the training zone near the Hens and Chickens Shoals, an area where deep ocean mingled with treacherous reefs, a terrain notoriously difficult to navigate. About 45 minutes after takeoff, Taylor began to sense something was wrong. His compass spun erratically, refusing to hold a steady bearing. The readings jumped wildly from one direction to another. He called out over the radio, "Plane 2, are you seeing anything strange with your compass?" There was a pause, then the voice of Ensign Bosey crackled through. "Yes, sir. My compass is going haywire too. I don't know which direction is correct." Taylor frowned slightly. The compass was a pilot's lifeline, especially over the open sea with no landmarks in sight. He tried to stay calm, but unease started rising in his gut. They had flown this route many times. Why would every compass suddenly fail? He ordered Flight 19 to maintain formation and instructed all pilots to check their secondary instruments, but no other systems reported any faults. Voices of confusion over the radio. 15 minutes later, the radio chatter grew disjointed, laced with confusion and growing tension. "Lieutenant Taylor, I can't see the mainland. My compass isn't giving a clear reading. We may have gone off course." Ensign Bosey's voice was tinged with anxiety. Taylor tried to keep his voice steady. "I'm double-checking the position. Flying southwest by south. If the compass is faulty, then where are we exactly?" No answer, only the sound of wind rushing past the fuselage. Suddenly, a strange noise burst through the radio like a faint explosion, followed by clattering sounds and a burst of static. Then the vague scream of someone in distress. Lieutenant Cox, the radio operator on the ground, immediately turned up the volume and leaned in. The signal was fragmented, interspersed with faint echoes and the labored breathing of someone aboard one of the planes. Taylor tried to regain control, but the panic in his voice was barely hidden. "We can't determine our location. The compasses are useless. Night's falling. Anyone got ideas?" Gradually, Flight 19's signals became intermittent, then faint. The pilots began arguing over the radio, desperately trying to agree on a course, but every effort led to more confusion. A brief silence, then a trembling voice. "I think we're flying north-northwest. But if that's true, we should have left the training zone long ago." Emotions in the cockpit. Every second feels like 4 of air inside the cockpits. Each man wrestled with rising fear and helplessness. Thoughts of home crept into their minds, of family, of loved ones waiting, of dreams still unfinished. Taylor, burdened with command, felt the weight of every decision pressing against his chest. He stared out the canopy window beneath him. The ocean faded under the orange glow of dusk. Questions surged through his mind. Is this the end? Has the war only changed shape, and now will be swallowed by this vast, indifferent sea? Suddenly, a strange light flickered across the water, blinking erratically, like a distress signal from another world. Sergeant Powers called out. Does anyone else see that light? That's not a ship or a plane. Radio fading, ending in silence. The radio grew weaker by the minute. Questions hung in the air with no answers. Silence descended like a heavy curtain. Lieutenant Cox, eyes fixed on the receiver at the control station, could do nothing but listen. As the last voices of Flight 19, after the final frantic radio transmissions, the sky slowly turned a fierce shade of orange-red, signaling the approaching dusk. But for Flight 19, this wasn't the end of an ordinary day, it was the beginning of a nightmare with no end in sight. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, commanding the squadron, struggled to maintain composure in his voice. Deep inside, however, he felt the weight pressing on every man aboard. Over the radio, voices grew tense or more desperate. We need a heading. Can someone confirm where we're going? Taylor barked. According to my compass, we're flying east, but I'm not sure anymore. Ensign Bosey replied, his voice trembling. Don't see land, just endless water, came Lieutenant Devlin's voice, equally strained. Despite being thousands of feet in the air, the atmosphere inside each cockpit began to heat up with confusion and doubt. Every man tried to remain calm, but uncertainty was slowly chipping away at their confidence. Taylor started to wonder if this was more than just a mechanical failure. He recalled the war years, the unpredictability, the unshakable feeling of danger just beyond sight. And now, a strange thought haunted him. Was something or someone playing with them? Some invisible force leading them astray? He glanced out the side window. The sun was nearly gone, slipping beneath the horizon. Clouds gathered, and the air around them seemed heavier, thicker. As darkness fully settled in, the pilots began to see something strange, lights glowing beneath the ocean's surface. Pale blue flashes, flickering erratically, with no clear pattern. Sergeant Powers was the first to speak up. That light, that's not from a ship. It's not from any town. It's coming from the ocean, and it's moving in circles. Other pilots began reporting similar sightings, their minds reeling with confusion. The radio transmissions became increasingly fragmented. The pilots' voices were laced with heavy breathing, panic, and even whispered prayers. Each man fought his own rising fear, trapped in a narrow cockpit of cold metal, suspended in a vast and indifferent sky. Taylor gripped the control stick tightly, his knuckles white. His eyes flicked toward the fuel gauge. The needle was falling faster than expected. We're running out of time, he whispered. Then came the moment when only the sound of wind howled across the static-filled radio waves, and a suffocating silence fell over Fort Lauderdale Air Station. On the ground, Lieutenant Cox stared at the radar screen, his eyes glassy with tears. He knew now, this was slipping beyond anyone's control. Chapter 3, a battle between within and beyond. As night fell, the sky around Flight 19 turned murky and starless, cloaking the aircraft in a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow everything. The 5 planes continued to glide above the vast Atlantic, but inside the cockpits, storms of emotion raged fiercer than any turbulence outside. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, in command, fought to contain the fear steadily rising in his chest. Through the intercom system, he could hear the tense, shallow breathing of his men, anxious whispers tangled with quiet prayers. He thought back to the war, the ferocious days in the Pacific, the near-death missions, but nothing compared to this, drifting through an endless sky with no direction, no escape, and no answers. Winds began to howl. Below, the sea surged in swelling waves, crashing against the undersides of the aircraft with a deep, haunting thrum. Gusts hit the planes with sudden force, causing them to shudder violently. Through the dim glow of cockpit instruments, Taylor saw his men gripping their controls, fighting both the elements and their own unraveling nerves. The temperature inside the cabins dropped rapidly, bringing with it a piercing cold that felt more like something inside than out, a chill that gnawed at the mind as much as the body. The sky was no longer a silent guardian overhead. It had become a silent adversary, invisible, but merciless, and amidst the chaos, each pilot was forced to confront the deepest corners of his soul. Sergeant Powers, once steady and composed, whispered to himself, unable to mask his dread, "Are we not going to make it out of this? Maybe my mother will never know what happened to me." Ensign Bosey, the youngest among them, fought back tears as he pictured his mother waiting for the Christmas cake he'd never taste. He bowed his head in silence, fear mutating into quiet grief. Taylor bore a responsibility that went beyond navigation. He was not just flying a plane. He was holding together the minds and hopes of his men. He knew he had to be strong. And yet, in that cold cockpit, the commander brushed against the thin veil of his own fear. His voice broke through the static of the radio, shaky, but full of resolve. "Flight 19, stay calm. Focus on your instruments. We will find our way." Those words flickered like a faint light in the mental darkness consuming the others. But then, the radio began to fade. The crackle of wind and sea overtook their voices. Transmissions grew faint, lost, unanchored. Below them, the endless black of the ocean, a flickering blue light emerged. Not natural, not steady, but pulsing like some ghostly beacon. No one could explain it, but all of them felt it, a strange presence that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Far behind them, the rescue seaplane, a Martin Mariner sent to search for the missing squadron, also reported seeing the same eerie light. Moments later, it too vanished from all contact. Flight 19 was no longer just battling malfunction or weather. They were fighting something deeper, a psychological storm of confusion, helplessness, and the thinnest thread of hope that somehow, somewhere, they might still find a way home. The control center at Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station had descended into a silent panic. It was 7:27 p.m. Night had fallen completely. All signals from Flight 19, the 5 Avenger training aircraft, had vanished from the radar. No emergency call, no last coordinates. Not a single plane returned. No one in the operations room spoke aloud, but their eyes all shared the same haunting question. How could an entire Flight 14 men disappear under clear skies, as if they never existed? The base commander didn't hesitate. Within 10 minutes, a rescue call was dispatched. At 7:50 p.m., a Martin PBM Mariner seaplane, Bureau number 59225, known among aviators as the flying gas tank, was ordered into the air. 13 crew members boarded, including pilots, technicians, a radio operator, and a navigator. They knew they were flying into a pitch-black ocean night in search of comrades who might already be lost to it. "This mission isn't like anything we've done before," Lieutenant Walter Reed, commander of the rescue crew, said quietly as he climbed the aircraft's boarding ladder. At the base mess hall, a cook later recalled, "I handed them coffee and cake. They were laughing, joking, said they'd be back in no time. I didn't know it was the last time I'd see them." A young fuel specialist remembered one voice from the rescue team saying, "There's something wrong here, but how could we live with ourselves if we didn't go?" At 8:10 p.m., the seaplane lifted off into the night. 8:24 p.m., its radio signal became erratic. 8:28 p.m., a nearby merchant vessel reported seeing a flash in the sky, followed by a loud explosion. 8:30 p.m., all contact with the rescue plane was lost. No distress call, no coordinates, no mayday, not a single word from anyone on board. The rescue aircraft vanished just like Flight 19. In under 7 hours, 6 aircraft and 27 men, pilots, crewmen, officers were gone. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no survivors, no bodies. Over the next 5 days, the U.S. Navy launched one of the largest air search and rescue missions in its history. Hundreds of planes covered the skies. Naval ships swept every square mile of the ocean east of Florida. Every shore was infected. Radar scanners operated around the clock. What they found was not debris, but silence, and an unshakable sense of something unnamed watching back. A relay radio station 300 miles away. A technician named Harold James scribbled in his notebook. On the night of December 5, around 9:00 p.m., I heard a weak signal. Very weak. It sounded like a man saying, "Mayday, Mayday, it's too late. We can't see anything." But the voice wasn't coming from Flight 19's channel, and the direction of the transmission didn't match any known path. The report was submitted but dismissed, labeled as significant interference with the signal. Years later, that notebook resurfaced, and with it, a chilling question. Were they calling back from somewhere we can't measure with human instruments? In the days that followed, families of the lost pilots began sharing strange stories. Ensign Joseph Bosey's mother dreamed of him soaking wet, standing in the rain, smiling and waving goodbye. She said, "I know he's gone, but he didn't die the way they said." Lieutenant Devlin's wife heard knocking at the door at 3:00 a.m. She opened it. No one was there. A girl in New Jersey, with no ties to anyone in the flight, said she dreamt of young pilots standing in the ocean, beneath a sun that had no color. No one could explain these visions, but they kept happening at the same time, in different places across America. Months later, a 500-page Navy report concluded, Flight 19 experienced navigational failure and eventually ran out of fuel, causing all aircraft to ditch at sea. There is no evidence of external interference. However, insufficient data prevents identification of a definitive cause. In a handwritten addendum, one senior officer noted, "They vanished from this world, as if they were never part of it." Then, in 1963, an amateur radio operator in Texas claimed to intercept a faint transmission on a long-wave channel. A man's voice said, "We're flying in circles. The compass doesn't work. I don't know where we are. It's so dark." When the tape was analyzed and compared with the 1945 transcripts, it was found to perfectly match the last known words of Lieutenant Charles Taylor. Fort Lauderdale, January 1946. The ocean wind still rustled the palm trees outside the naval base, but something in the air had changed permanently. Once a lively post-war training center, the base now echoed with ghostly remnants, the footsteps of pilots who never returned, the hum of engines that would never start again. Lieutenant Robert Cox, the radio operator on duty the night Flight 19 vanished, remembered every broken signal, every fractured cry for help. He was quietly discharged a month after the incident, labeled psychologically unfit for duty. In his private journal, he wrote, "I heard them. They were calling back. They begged. I just couldn't find them. That's the worst part. I heard them, and I was helpless." Cox never flew again. In Ohio, Mrs. Marie Taylor, mother of Flight 19E's commander, Lt. Charles Taylor, wore her son's pilot insignia to church every Sunday. She never believed he was dead. "I don't care what they say," she told reporters. "If my boy had died, I'd feel it, but I don't. Not one bit." In 1947, a group of retired officers, civilian scientists, and radio experts launched their own unofficial investigation. The Navy offered no support, but they compiled hundreds of reports, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed fragments of old radio logs. One physicist, Dr. Michael Wren, a former Air Force lab consultant, stated, "There's a chance Flight 19 entered a temporary magnetic anomaly, a real phenomenon that can disrupt aircraft instruments. But it's never been recreated, and no one's been able to prove it existed that night." Meanwhile, new theories emerged, wild, strange, and unprovable. Some speculated the flight veered into Cuban airspace and was secretly shot down. Others believed the crew fell into the hands of a Cold War intelligence operation, a cover-up too large to be admitted. Still, others proposed a more fantastic theory. Flight 19 passed through a portal and simply never came back. In 1952, a small article in the Miami Herald, page 7, read, "A 5-year-old boy in Jacksonville told his parents, 'I flew over the ocean once. I got lost. There was a man named Charlie. He kept calling the radio, but nobody answered. The family didn't know anyone named Charlie, but Charles Carroll Taylor, Flight 19E's commander, was known to his fellow pilots simply as Charlie. Over the next 2 years, 9 more reports emerged from across the US. Children, sleepwalkers, fevered patients, all muttering the same elements. A lost aircraft, a blue light in the sea, a voice over radio repeating, "We don't know where we are anymore." By the 1960s, as the term Bermuda Triangle gained notoriety, Flight 19 became its first and most enduring legend. Journalists, mystics, and documentarians reinvestigated the case from every conceivable angle. Some claim the flight entered a magnetic corridor tunnel between timelines. Others proposed a time loop that the pilots were still up there, flying eternally, lost in an airspace with no exit. A few suggested extraterrestrial technology, that someone, or something, had taken them. Journalist Alan Finkel, "You don't have to believe in aliens to admit some things defy science. Flight 19 is a crack in reality. The question is, what leaked through?" In 1991, during a deep-sea Navy expedition near the Florida coast, a metallic structure was discovered 700 feet below the surface. At first, it was assumed to be part of an inflatable but when divers approached, it didn't match any clues. It was described as a hollow cylinder, faintly humming when touched. They lowered a cable, but the signal spread instantly. When they tried again, the object was gone dark. In 2005, Clarence Walters, an amateur radio researcher in New Jersey, recorded a faint broadcast on a long-abandoned low-band frequency. In the static, a man's voice said, "We're flying east. There's nothing here. It's dark. It's so dark." When compared to 1945 Navy recordings, the voice matched 93%. Charles Taylor signal as .81 could explain how the signal from 1945 could surface 60 years later. Clarence offered no theory. In his notebook, he wrote one line, "Flight 19 never came home. They never landed at any airstrip. No one stood waiting to greet them. No tire marks on the runway. No final letters sent to loved ones. Only an absence, silent, invisible, and infinite." But the strangest part is this: though they vanished, people still hear them through radios, through dreams, through testimonies that cannot be verified yet cannot be dismissed. Their disappearance was not merely an aviation accident. It was a crack in humanity's confidence, a whisper suggesting this world is wider, deeper, and more mysterious than we dare to believe. We do not know where they went. We do not know if they glimpsed the Florida coast one last time. We do not know if they felt fear, or if they surrendered to their fate somewhere above the dark, endless sea. But we know this: they flew with purpose, with duty, with each other, and because of that, they never truly disappeared. Today, in Fort Lauderdale, quiet memorial stands in the Naval Air Station Museum courtyard. 14 names from Flight 19, 13 more from the rescue crew who followed then unreturned. Yet each time the wind stirs the palms, each time we look up into a starlit sky, perhaps they are still flying, along a flight path unseen, on a frequency only the heart can receive. For some flights don't need to land to be remembered, and some souls never need to be seen.